So, does everybody have the script?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Why don't we go ahead and pick a stand, any stand.
Where we
Getting
at?
close here, guys.
Where we
We got
at?
2 more minutes.
2 minutes.
So if you have your drinks, make sure that leave them open so we're not messing with them.
Stand by 30 seconds for the ID. Is the Five, 4, 3, 2. This is KTKN, AM 930, Ketchikan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and all the ships at sea, and welcome to a live broadcast of El.
The corpse was floating just at the bottom of the ladder where the dock lights reached thinly through the murky rain. The corpse was floating on its face, the way men will, and the back of the head seemed to move. No, that was just the tide running through the hair. The tide had the corpse pinned against a piling, so that the arms trailed out at an angle with the head and the feet curved in the same direction. The tide bubbles were full of phosphorus and lit up all along one side. Sven Nordsen had been drinking for about 7 or 8 hours, and the quality of the liquor in Ketchikan had finally overcome even his strong stomach. He was so sick now that he was nearly sober. He stood on the Tangas trading dock and wished he was back at sea in the Mary D, peacefully trolling for salmon with only a storm or two to worry about, and maybe fog. Sven didn't see the corpse right away. When he did, he leaned out and stared. Then he gave a shuddering kind of scream and went staggering up the dock to tell somebody about it. It was a somewhat wild night, even for Alaska, and so much had happened since dinner time that just one scream attracted no attention. Sven found Kelly, the night patrolman, and told him. Kelly went down to the Tangas dock and looked at the corpse. It was still there. Kelly flashed his light on it, looked at it for a little while, and then said,
You go find Chief Danton, Sven. He's up at the anchor.
Sven went up to the anchor, more sober now, interested enough in his mission to avoid the 3 fights which lay in his path, even though 2 of his friends were definitely interested. He found mild, serious Chief Danton.
There's a corpse down at the Tangas dock, Mr. Danton.
Who is it?
Said Danton, finishing his drink.
I don't know. Kelly said for you to come down.
Have a drink, Sven?
Oh, no.
Never say I didn't offer you one.
Well, maybe the one.
Give him a drink, Morris.
Said Chief Danton, picking up his uniform cap. Something up? Said the barkeeper.
Now, just a body down at Tangas.
Who is it?
I don't know.
Sven watched Danton climb back into his black slicker and leave. Morris set up a drink of vodka.
Takes the fog out of your bones.
Said Sven apologetically as he drained the glass. Who found her?
I did. I looked down, and there it was.
Anything on her?
How do I know? I got no love for Holland stiffs around. I tell you, it sure was some shock to see it down there. Must have been in the water a month or 2.
No, they go to pieces in a month.
Damned if they do.
Said Jiki, the wolf tracker down the bar.
I seen a floater up in Sitka one time that had been in the water 2 months.
It's colder in Sitka.
Yeah, the hell it is. The water's warmer. It's closer to Japan, isn't it?
A young man took a seat near Sven and threw down a silver dollar. He motioned Morris to fill up Sven's glass.
You said something about a corpse?
Sven looked at him with suspicion. He was too well dressed and too neatly shaven to be an Alaskan. He had a peculiarly thorough way of looking at a person which wasn't polite. Yeah, he must be a Chee Chalker. Still, he looked strong. It's better to be polite. Besides, he had wanted a drink, as Sven belatedly discovered. Norton repeated his question.
Yeah, I was down by the Tangas trading dock.
Did you find it?
Yeah, I found it.
Guess I'll go down and have a look.
He left his change on the bar and took up his raincoat. It was a nearly white trench coat with a wide skirt. Norton pulled his broad-brimmed city hat down over his eyes and walked out. The rain was sweeping in regimental fronts all along the dark boardwalk. Neon signs in the bars made little progress against the soggy dark. Norton walked down past the Sourdough Hotel and out on the Tangus dock. A stiff wind was blowing up Tonga's Narrows, blowing froth off the tops of the waves, which were faintly luminous patches of white in the blackness. Norton looked around. The light was on at the fish exchange, and a lot of men were standing around in there. Norton pushed through the huddle at the door and came up alongside Fagler, the federal marshal who was talking to Chief Dan. Fagler stopped, talking, and looked at Norton.
Hello, Norton.
There was a faint antagonism in his voice, as though he resented Norton's butting in. The FBI was not too popular with the Ketchikan marshal, for it tended to override him in certain matters. Norton looked at the corpse. It was stretched out on the floor, leaving a wide pool of water which ran out and mixed with the water streaming off the raincoats of the men who stood about it. The face was eaten away by fish. It was bloated, and the flesh was gleaming white where it had been cut. Other places it was black.
Who is it?
Fagler and the marshal didn't answer.
It's James England, the man who owns the radio station here.
Chief Denton displayed the name inside the man's coat.
Probably got drunk and walked in the water.
Said Fagler. Bill Norton was only professionally interested. The FBI was not concerned with murder until it became part of other things. But Bill Norton didn't like the officious assurance in the marshal's voice. He bent down and turned the head to one side. And the spot where the skull had been kicked in.
Fell in, hit a piling before he went in.
Yeah, every time I see a corpse pulled out of the water in this town, it hit a piling when it fell in and broke open its head.
It's easy to do.
That was Thomas Hatlin, the local banker. He stood eyeing Norton from under the yellow brim of a sou'wester.
That's right. Besides, there ain't any call to stir up a lot of trouble in an investigation.
Dead by accidental drowning.
Said the coroner, writing in a book.
Isn't that what you say, boys?
His jury nodded their heads. Norton just looked around.
Well, what would you do then?
Said Fagler. Norton looked at the marshal and walked out. He walked out of the dock and stood there for a while, letting the rain cool off his face. Oh, he hated being squeamish. But he had never gotten so callous that he did not get sick when he had to look at a drowned corpse. The nausea would come over him and stay with him, sometimes for an hour. He looked at the patches in the dark made by the white caps and wished he was as tough as people thought he was. Or he wished that people wouldn't think he was so tough, so that he wouldn't have to be tough. The men came out of the fish exchange, and a wagon came for the corpse of James England. Paul Wagner came up and stood beside Norton in the dark rain. Paul Wagner owned the Tangus Trading Company and was a very important man at Ketchikan, even in Alaska.
Aren't you with the FBI?
Norton looked at him from under his hat brim.
Fagler said you were, and I wanted to know what you thought about it. I'm Paul Wagner. Well, I wanted to know what you thought about this. It is serious. James England was an important fellow to Alaska. His station up there on the knoll is Alaska's biggest and best. Now what's going to happen to it? I depend on him, or rather did, for my advertising. What do you make of it?
Make of what?
Why, his murder.
I thought they said it was suicide.
They said it was accidental.
I wasn't listening very closely.
What do you make of it?
Why should I make anything of it? It's none of my business.
I thought you were in town to look into his disappearance.
Did you?
Well, that was my impression. The federal marshal wasn't making any progress, so I thought you had been sent down to look into it.
Know anything about it?
About his disappearance?
Yes. Yes.
Wagner looked closely at Norton, but he couldn't see through the rain and shadows well enough.
I know no more than anybody else. He had no enemies in particular, and he was well loved.
I heard differently.
No man is worth his salt who hasn't a few enemies.
Wagner stayed around for nearly a minute, but nothing more was said, and so, uncomfortably, he went away. Norton was glad he had gone. He wanted some more cold rain on his face. Oh, he wished corpses weren't a part of the lawman's business. At times like these, he intensely regretted the small gold pinned into his wallet. That small gold disc sent him to such unseemly places. Ketchikan, for example. He looked at the rain and wondered that the skies were never emptied. 180 inches a year was a tropical output with none of the tropical advantages. Of course, it wasn't as cold here as it was in Juneau, far north though it was. It was as warm through the winter as most of the U.S. coastal towns. Well, it wouldn't rain. Bill Norton did not much like this country. He had been in it 6 months. Most of the 6 spent behind a desk in Juneau. The last spent wandering around Ketchikan trying to get a lead on the sack of snow and Jerry McCain. He had found the heroin leading nowhere so far as he could discover, and he had found no sign of FBI Special Agent Jerry McCain. There was no more snow. There was no trail whatever leading to the disappearance of his former boss. There was only rain. Rain and bars, drunken fishermen, soldiers much drunker. Bill Norton looked at the bobbing masthead and boom of a halibut boat tied to the Thames dock, and he was reminded of a gibbet. Up the slippery boards skated a burblingly active young man, one of Bill's main responsibilities. Chick Star had just graduated from the school in Washington. Some clerk had sent him to Alaska on the first boat. Chick wore people out,
What's the excitement?
said Chick.
Corpse.
Said Norton, diffidently.
Oh, honest? Who? Where?
England. Drowned.
Gee, you finally located England? Gosh, say, that's good work. Gosh, why wasn't I around?
Well, if you'd stop chasing women, you might get in on something sometime.
I don't chase women. Why would I chase women?
Norton looked at him. Chick was 6'7". He weighed 218 pounds. He ran into and knocked over things. He was 23 and serious. He was full of ambition. He polished his gold disc every night before he went to bed and carried his heavy Colt's revolver to dances.
If you don't, you go nutty with this rain.
Oh, I like the rain. It's exciting. Things are dark and mysterious. Hey, where'd you find England?
I didn't find it.
But you must have. Was he stabbed?
He fell in and hit his head on a piling. The fish ate his face.
Oh,
Well, if you can't take it, you've got no business hanging around the bureau.
oh, you're being modest. You found him and he was murdered and you know who did it.
Sherlock Holmes doesn't happen to be even a faint relation of mine.
Norton slogged through the horizontal sea air toward the bed at the Sourdough Hotel.
Say, did you see that?
What?
Those 2 men come out from behind that truck. Turn the corner up there. They look suspicious.
They are suspicious. You've given them plenty of warning with that brass voice of yours.
Honest, they did.
Probably were having a quiet drink where their pals wouldn't ask for any.
Chick loped up beside Norton, splashing heavily through the puddles like an overgrown tank, and thoroughly spattering his despondent boss. Suddenly, Chick threw out his arm to stop Norton and almost knocked him flat backwards on the slippery boardwalk.
Look at that.
Said Chick, in what he hopefully supposed to be a whisper. A young woman had come out of the door of the Sourdough Hotel ahead of him. The lights from the windows were not sufficient to show her features, but they were ample enough to bring into silhouette the 2 men who emerged from an alleyway. The silhouettes swooped down upon the young woman and grabbed her. Hurriedly, they led her straight toward the dock. They evidently did not see Chick and Norton standing on the walk before them, for all was blackness in that direction.
Take your hands off me.
Protested a girl's voice.
Come along.
Said one of her captors. Norton was always faintly nervous when he was with Chick. He could never be sure what Chick would do. Chick would follow orders, after a fashion, with a few improvements of his own. And when Chick had no specific orders, anything might happen. Chick gallantly sprang forward. His first blow knocked the pup nearest the gutter, sprawling into the street, where he splashed and bounced and splashed again. Following up, Chick forgot the small detail of keeping his eye on the other man and was in an instant beyond him, thus presenting his back. The arm of the second tup came up and went down, and Chick curled into himself before the sound of the striking blackjack came to Norton. Chick was a bundle of mud-stained clothes in the gutter. Norton sighed He stepped forward. The blackjack came down, and the wrist swung into the crook of Norton's arm. Norton swung sideways to the top. Out of the bearded face came a distorted yowl of anguish, cut by the muffled snap of an elbow. Norton caught the blackjack before it hit the sidewalk. Norton had no illusions. The tuck was crumpling, but one flip of the sap made the job complete. The other man was getting up and dazedly attempting to locate something to fight. He had his back to the lights. He saw the upraised blackjack, and then he saw stars. Norton rapped him over the ear and across the nose for luck, and gave him a healthy kick in the ribs to see if he was still conscious. He wasn't. Chick was moaning, and the girl was crying.
Shut up!
Norton told the girl. She looked at him through startled eyes.
Son of beef.
Grumbled Norton, picking Chick out of the gutter.
Stand up, will you? Do you want to drown?
The girl stood paralyzed, it seemed, by shock.
Well, are you waiting for a fish derrick to come along and lift it? Give me a hand.
Without taking her eyes from Norton, she took Chick's arm and helped stand Chick on his feet.
Now help me walk him into the sourdough.
She helped him walk Chick into the sourdough. They somehow got the weighty colossus across the lobby. A river of muddy rain in their wake and up the steps. The clerk woke up and looked indifferently at them. He yawned and went back to sleep.
3rd floor. Bear up. I can carry him by myself.
The girl put all the strength she could into boosting Chick up the stairs. The case was so narrow that they could not walk on either side of the engine gallant, but after much pulling and pushing and swearing by Norton, they got him up to the 3rd floor and down the hall to his room. Norton shoved Chick onto the bed.
Get some water.
He said to the girl without looking at her. She stared at Norton until she reached the bathroom, and only ceased when she had to locate the water tap and a towel. She came back and continued her hypnotized regard. Norton pushed the wet towel over Chick's face. Chick tried to push it away. Norton felt the bruise and decided the injury was slight. He decided that not from any medical knowledge of the fracture or concussion, but the belief that nothing short of a ton of dynamite placed directly under his feet could really hurt Chick.
That's all. He'll come around.
For the first time she spoke to him.
I haven't thanked you for helping me.
For the first time, Norton looked fully at her. She was a beautiful woman. That he could not deny. She was a heartwarming blonde in a land of brunettes. She was expensively and tastefully dressed, and was certainly a lady. What's more, a rarity.
What?
Well, there's no telling what might have happened if you hadn't attacked those men.
Yeah.
Said Norton, his tone faintly ironic. She frowned a little, failing to understand him.
But I truly appreciate it.
You can beat it. If you please.
He added, remembering that she was, after all, a woman, and that he had to be polite.
What's the matter with you?
Lady, I don't happen to be as young or as foolish as my friend. Good night.
You mean you wouldn't come to the rescue of a woman?
Certainly, I'll rescue anybody if they need it.
Sir, I do not like your tone.
Lady, I neither know nor like your game. Good night.
And what do you mean by that?
It was plain to see that her temper was delicately adjusted on a full minute of mercury.
I mean, you'd better paddle down and see if your pals have come to their better senses before they drown in this confounded rain.
You are insulting.
And you are obvious. Good night.
She slammed the door so hard that the walls went in and out accordion fashion for seconds. Then she threw the door open, snatched up the purse she had left on the bed, and slammed the door twice as hard. A moment later, she opened the door a 3rd time.
I ought to scratch your eyes out.
I ought to hang one on your lovely eye for getting my young friend sacked. And if you open that door again, I will.
This time, when she slammed the door, a chair fell over, and a pane of glass fell musically out of the window to the street below. Chick stirred fitfully at his breakfast and waited for the storm to break around his head. Norton did not seem ready to let it break, for he sat askew on the leather seat in the Medlin Hotel restaurant, looking sadly through the Venetian blinds at the sheets and sheets of rain which fell monotonously upon Ketchikan. What a hell of a country, thought Norton. Ought to give it back to the Russians, or the Twinkets, or the weather. Oh, what he wouldn't give to be having his breakfast at the Long Prance in New York.
Well,
Well, what? You got a clip on the noggin and it made you sick, and now you are sorry for it.
I suppose a gentleman was supposed to stand there and watch those thugs manhandle a lady?
Who was manhandling a lady? What lady?
You saw it.
Saw what?
Two lugs manhandling a lady.
Where?
Gee, Mr. Norton, my head aches too much to get all balled up in one of your riddles. Those two guys would have thrown her off a dock or something if I hadn't stepped in.
And he plunged deeply and dangerously.
I wasn't so far gone that I didn't hear you talk terribly impolite to that girl. She wasn't any common girl. She was a beautiful lady.
Too beautiful. Entirely too beautiful for this godforsaken country.
I was right doing something about it.
About what?
Oh, there you go again. And the way my head aches, too.
If you'd keep out of the way of such childish brawls, you wouldn't have headaches.
Childish? Oh, my head. Mr. Norton, have you no gallantry? Couldn't you see that she was being attacked?
All I saw was useless nonsense. Two men dash out in front of us. She comes out of the sourdough, they attack her, and we're supposed to attack them and get our blocks knocked off, and then everyone will say it was common street fight and bury us without musketry in a grave half filled with this damned rain.
Chick was gaping to the point of displaying his last mouthful of eggs.
You mean that was a plot?
Call it a plot if you want. Personally, I think somebody big time had better come up here and show these babies how to rub people out. All they can think of is splitting their skulls and dropping the corpse into Tonga's Narrows, where it very seldom ever comes up again.
Gosh, then England was murdered. And they figured you know too much. So they staged a scrap to get you involved so they could rub you out.
Maybe. Maybe not. But the lady of last night was a plant even you should have seen through, my thick-witted friend.
Gosh, then I did get sucked in, didn't I? But why didn't they just shoot us in the back of the head?
FBI men shot in the back are embarrassing. FBI men knocked over in a common street brawl where they have no business are subject to censure from the Bureau. You figure it out. I'm depressed.
This has something to do with England's death. He was too influential. His broadcasting station was the only widespread medium of news in Alaska. He was murdered by somebody that wanted to shut him up.
Chick gloated over his own perspicuity and forgot about his head. For in truth, he had been suffering more from worry than a chance concussion. Chick did not run well on worry. He was better running on a high wave of enthusiasm.
Somebody at that inquest figured you had something on England's death because you were the only smart law officer in Alaska. They wanted to kill you or something.
Wonderful.
Looking at the rain and thinking about the souffles they served at the Long Prance.
Then you did get something on somebody when you looked at England's body.
By the way, mail this when you're finished with breakfast.
He handed an envelope to Chick.
What's this?
That piece of evidence I took off England's body. It has to go back to the Bureau.
But you aren't supposed to keep evidence. You'll get in trouble with the marshal here.
They said it was accidental and closed the case. Besides, that is just a slip of paper with Montgomery and Roebuck printed on it and some writing I can't make out. It isn't a bill, but it seems to be a note of some kind. Hence, I want to know what it says. Curiosity, that's all. Now get out and mail. Sit still.
The man who The bandages nearly covering his face, shaped to hold his nose in place, had limped into the restaurant. And failing to see Norton back in the corner, took a seat at the counter, his back to them. He was a heavily built man, as tall as Chick, but burly. He wore a red cruiser coat and a sou'wester turned up in front. The way he squirmed around, he seemed to be in pain.
Who's that?
Shut up,
It looks like one of those guys that attacked the girl. But how'd he get so bunged up?
said Norton with an under-table kick.
Ah!
A short while later, another man came in by the door at the far end. The second had his arm in a cast. His face was pale beneath his black beard. His hat perched precariously upon the bandages which covered his skull. He took a seat beside the first one without saying anything.
What happened to him? That's the other one, or I'm blind and drunk. Oh!
Norton quietly finished his breakfast and then sat warming his hands on his coffee cup. He did not have long to wait. Soon the young lady in question came up to the door of the Medlin Hotel restaurant. However, she seemed to sense Norton, so she turned defensive as she entered.
Good morning.
Said Norton, getting up. She seemed to be having difficulty in expressing her thoughts, for they were obviously not friendly. She took the shaking out of her green rain cape as an excuse to be silent.
Nice even weather we're having.
I'm glad you think so.
She seemed to be hanging between two decisions. In a moment, she sat down and let Norton hang up her rain cape. Chick looked at her in an alarmingly goggle-eyed fashion. He was trying to communicate that while Norton might be frosty, Chick didn't believe such things. However, the effect was merely gruesome.
Something stuck in your throat?
Chick turned red and retreated into his car.
I heard that you are Norton of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
People are always hearing things in this town. The fact is doubtful.
Well, I have it on good authority. Permit me to introduce myself. I am Elaine Halloway.
Please.
I have something I want to talk to you about. Is it safe to talk here?
That is all up to you.
He glanced around, but did not seem to take any particular notice of the two men at the counter, not 10 feet away.
Mr. Norton, about 2 years ago, my grandfather died and left me the ownership of the Halloway Halibut fleet. I thought it was in good order and that it had been making money, but within 6 months, the revenue began to fall off. I tried to get some reason for it from my manager here, Mr. Stoddard, but instead of information, all I received was his resignation. Then, when I came here a few weeks ago, I found out that several loans had been made on the boats by Thomas Heckley, the local banker, and it seems that I arrived just in time to see the loans foreclosed. There is something terribly wrong about all this. Well, it leaves me stranded here in Ketchikan. I am sure there may be some justice in this land. Well, how can it be possible for me to lose that fleet without ever having seen the papers on it?
That is one for the federal marshal.
But Mr. Fagler tells me that there is nothing I can do about it. I thought if I found you and asked you, you might be able to tell me something to do.
That's completely outside my mind.
But isn't there any law in this land at all?
Not enough to worry about.
But you are the law here. Alaska is a territory and under federal jurisdiction, and you are a federal officer.
I am. Perhaps. But you see, the federal marshal is the one who is supposed to get concerned about fraud and such civil offenses. I am here to protect the government.
But Mr. Fagler keeps putting me off. He doesn't seem to be interested.
Norton looked at her and sighed. Her gaze was straight enough. God knows her proud features were beautiful enough to turn any man's head. He checked himself smartly from an impulse to soften his tone and to be kind and generous and understanding.
Miss Hathaway, federal marshals are appointed because they helped somebody get into Congress or the Senate, or because they have uncles and fathers-in-law that know people. And that's neither my concern nor my quarrel. That is the way the United States sees fit to run Alaska, and I'm not running the United States.
You sound as if you were.
All right, get mad, but that's the situation.
Cad.
You know, you can make your fortune acting. Why worry about a halibut fleet?
Acting? What are you talking about, sir?
About acting and lying and a few other things.
You are insulting. I thought FBI men were supposed to be gentlemen.
So they are. If I weren't, I would throw you out.
That raised her beyond the limits of speech, and she stood there tall and majestic, so angry that the silver foxes on her arm quivered in every hair. Her chair belatedly crashed to the floor, thrown back by her sudden rising, and scared Chick out of 200 or 300 age minutes. For Chick had seen the two men at the counter get interested some seconds ago. She spun on a spike heel and left the place, the air smoking where she had stood. Two battered roustabouts got up from their stools at the counter and loomed over the table. They were not pleased about anything, announced the black-bearded one.
I, Russian Tarlov. I am tough. Last night, you break my arm. Today, you talk that way to Miss Holloway? Someday soon, I put a fish fork in your middles and turn it around slow.
Deliberately, he spat into the middle of the table and stalked out. His partner lingered long enough to nod once, and decisively, and then he too was gone. Chick relaxed and mopped his head, which had again begun to ache.
Gee, what's this all about?
Don't strain your brains.
But they got mad because you talked nasty to her, and last night they were trying to beat her up, and she says she's in trouble, and you say she's lying. Gosh, it's awful early to have all this happen.
Thomas Hacklin, dyspeptic and cantankerous and weasel-faced from trying to see through the bars of his bank into the pockets of his patrons, walked up to the cashier a few yards from Norton and paid for his breakfast.
Good morning.
Said Hecklin.
Good morning.
Said Norton. Hecklin went out.
Where did he come from?
He's really a ghost.
Gosh, I wish somebody would tell me about things.
I wish you'd keep your nose out of this and mail that letter.
Chick got up and gingerly put his hat on his head. There was a crash of glass, and his hat soared over into the next booth. Chick would have stood there gaping at the bullet hole in the window if Norton hadn't nearly kicked his shins apart in getting him down.
What was that?
A bullet. A bullet fired from a gun by somebody that is mad at us. If he hadn't forgotten the window, you would now be a corpse. Bullets travel at considerable velocity and enter people and kill people.
What are you getting up for?
Said the shivering Chick.
Now that guy is a mile from here by now.
Said Norton, prying the bullet out of the wall with his penknife.
Pay the check and let's get out of here.
4 days later, Norton stood before the long rows of bronze mailboxes in the Federal Building, pulling out his mail and quietly swearing. For the water kept running off his hat brim and down on the letters he was trying to organize. He ran out of filing fingers and moved over to the glass-topped table Uncle Sam had provided for his customers. Uncle Sam, however, had not provided much light, and Norton was steadily getting into a bad mood when he heard the sharp rap, rap, rap of heels 60 or 70 feet up the way. Instinct made him glance in that direction, and interest there held his attention. Elaine Holloway approached her mailbox and stood digging through a woman's pocketbook debris to find a key. She was some time in finding it, and the interval gave Norton an opportunity to study her profile for the first time. At first glance, she looked fragilely beautiful, and a longer observation found up the strength of her chin and the weight of her brow and the height, indicating a willful determination and considerable intelligence. She was, quite obviously, a woman used to luxury. Her clothing was silk beneath the rubberized silk of her rain cape, black silk, strange material for a woman to wear in Ketchikan, where wool fabrics were almost wholly utilized. She found her key at last, and found only one letter in her box. Evidently it was not an important letter, for she thrust it disinterestedly into her purse. She straightened her rain cape and zipped it up the front, her purse under her arm within. Norton watched her, vaguely thrilled by her movements. She was like some luxurious leopard, easy but swift of action, posing her body indolently. When she walked away, despite the rap of her heels, there was a feeling about her of slow, boundless strength and reserve. She seemed to pace rather than walk. How little nervousness there was about her. Definite will and stubbornness, but nervousness, no. Norton had a sudden vision of her sheathed in silk upon the black spread of a divan, stretching her bent arm above her, exhibiting no excitement, but languidly easing the vital tension which she still radiated. A small, unexplainable quiver of excitement touched the hair at the back of his neck and made his fingertips unsteady on his letters. He found shortly after that he had read the same address over about 15 times, without saying it at all. He forced himself into casual action and thought once more. God, her effect upon him. No woman he could ever recall had had that effect upon him whatsoever. Was it because of his sudden realization that she was definitely a dangerous woman? Was it some eighth sense of alarm? Or was it positive attraction? Angrily, he shuffled his letters together. He did not like to be affected physically or emotionally. He had always prided himself that his emotions were far, far away, that he could dictate the way he ought to feel about something, and then feel that way. And now he was violently telling himself not to be in the least interested in that woman, because he knew he was disobedient beyond any hope of subordination. He stalked out of the federal building, or almost out of it. He was just about to push open the outward set of the double doors when he saw her again. She was standing on the walk talking to a man. Norton, unreasonably, did not like the idea, but neither did he want to intrude himself, which he would have done had he finished opening the glass door. The drizzle made it hard for him to see the man's features, and that the fellow was a Native American or a Filipino. In his yellow sou'wester pulled down over his brow, the straps of which were dangling. The short, yellow oilskin jacket was too big for him, covering both hands. His collar swallowing nearly half his face. He had wool pants baggily thrust into black fisherman's boots. Their conversation was brief, mainly of her own making, and Norton wished he could have heard it. She presently turned and proceeded uptown, picking her way through the puddles in the gravel street. The man to whom she had talked entered the federal building. For an instant, Norton had a full view of the face through the glass. Norton carried a full rogues gallery of faces about in his head, that being part of his business. He quickly stepped aside, giving the fellow no view of himself, and went on out into the rain. He walked across the street and stood under the overhang of the Union Drug Company, waiting, small excitement stirring up the bored lethargy into which he had fallen the last month. A nose so smashed as to be no nose at all, but a breathing place, an eye whose lid was split, revealing a streak of red, and the inability of the man as a fighter. His weak but brutish mouth matched perfectly the picture of one George Fishcatcher, arrested by Jerry McCain, Norton's missing boss, on a charge of distributing heroin. But he was released for a lack of evidence sufficient to convince a hostile jury. George Fishcatcher came out of the federal building and stood in the rain a little while looking at the fishing boats in Thomas Basin. Shortly, having made up his mind, he went along Stedman Street on the water side, across Fish Creek, and thence down the ramp to the Thomas Basin floats. At a good interval, Norton followed him. George Fishcatcher shuffled along the greasy float to sea float, and there was accosted by another fisherman, who held him in conversation a few minutes, made a sign of drinking, and took George Fishcatcher aboard a seine boat below. Norton could watch the seine boat through a maze of trolling pole masts of other craft from the vantage and dryness of the green telephone booth at the bottom of the ramp. He did not find patience enough to wait very long, for he knew that two fishermen could take a lot of time over a bottle. He turned to the phone and called the Sourdough Hotel. 10 minutes later, Chick puffed down the ramp to Norton's side.
You got a lead on England's murder?
Well,
Gee, honest?
He looked at the boat Norton was watching.
Is he aboard that?
Norton gave him a brief description of George Fishcatcher, adding,
he's a pretty bad fellow. When drunk, he'll kill on sight. He's already knocked off about 13 men. He's drunk now and pretty soon will come ashore. When he does, shadow him until he's someplace where it looks like he'll stay for a while and then phone me. But don't lose sight of him.
Gee, it's dangerous.
Very dangerous.
Norton solemnly assured him.
You can count on me.
The FBI depends on you, my boy.
Then he shook Chick's hand and went up the ramp. When he got back to the hotel, he took off his wet coat and shoes and lay down on the bunk, certain of a few hours of sleep. Dreamily, he wondered if George Fishcatcher had ever really killed anybody. Oh well, it would keep Chick on the job. Much refreshed, Norton took his dinner at the Medlin Hotel restaurant, looking up the rain with a sadistic smile. Every time a more vigorous gust swooped out of the southeast and up the street, he'd smile again. Chick had been feeling useless and in the way, but how proud Chick must be feeling now, with a dangerous criminal to watch. Norton could visualize him standing somewhere under a dripping eave, waiting for Fishcatcher to stagger out and make way to another of Ketchikan's 61 bars. Paul Wagner sidled up to the table, his flabby face twitching on one side. Wagner had had a few drinks, and it showed in the underlying pastiness of his flesh, and a strange lack of color in his eyes.
Been busy these days?
Said Wagner. Norton did not ask him to sit down. He did not like the fellow in the first place, and he did not want company in the second place.
Busy enough.
Wagner lurched against the table.
I bet you're gonna pick up the guy that got England pretty soon, aren't you?
Wouldn't be amazed.
That's so.
Interested.
Well, any man would be interested to see the man strung up that had killed his best friend.
That isn't part of my business.
Ah, you just catch it for the hangman, huh? Well, if you want any help, you just come down to the Tamgus Trading Company and let me know.
Norton watched him walk away and noted that the walk was far steadier now than it had been before the brief interlude. The spoilers are still in Alaska, Norton told himself. Paul Wagner stood ready to strip any fisherman of his hard-earned profits, his boat, or his household. Unlimited credit extended made Paul Wagner the virtual owner of the fishing fleet. A savory pair, Wagner and Thomas Heckman. The only other interruption was Russian Tarlov. Russian Tarlov was also drunk. A prolonged raiding period left the Ketchikanians one diversion, and it seemed to Norton's distorted viewpoints, one only. Russian Tarlov's bandages were filthy, and there was tobacco juice in his beard, matting it. Russian Tarlov stopped at the table and leered at Norton.
You think you're some fighter? Ha! You think you can lick Russian Tarlov?
I wouldn't be surprised, seeing that it's happened once.
Yeah, you hit me from back. Pretty soon, I get well, and I show you plenty.
All right.
I'm the toughest man in Ketchikan. I eat people alive.
Without salt?
Without So, you make fun of Russian Tarlov, huh?
Might as well, for he doesn't seem to care how ridiculous he makes himself.
How what?
Ridiculous.
I look that up. And if it's a bad word, I kill you.
Oh, it's a very bad word.
Russian Tarlov went outside and began to stop people. Presently, he seemed to forget about the insult and wandered off with his old pal, Drinkward. About 9, Norton was lying in his bunk, reading a murder mystery. During the last hour, he had cast several glances in the direction of the phone, wondering that Chick had not reported. Couldn't have taken Fishcatcher that long to pass. Norton read another chapter and looked at the clock, and again at the phone. 9:30 and no response. Well, he'd wait another half hour and then go down and try to trail Chick. Maybe the damn fool had gotten bored and gone to a movie or something. 10 o'clock. A renewed shower of rain came around, swearing at the bureau for sending him Chick Norton. And as Norton got into his white trench coat, shoved his revolver into his pocket out of habit, pulling down his hat against the sheets of water and went forth upon the slippery boardwalks of the town. Thomas Basin was well lit, the lights of his moored boats and those of the float reflecting badly in the rain-whipped water. Norton went carefully down the ramp. He did not suppose he would find Chick, but before he began a round of the bars and the two movie theaters, he had better make sure. He went into the phone booth and found it empty. Clearly so. He had almost turned back without seeing the hat. It was Chick's hat. Chick had worn its bullet hole proudly, but now it had more than that. It had been thoroughly crushed as though stepped on in his struggle, leading it to ruin. Norton lit a pocket top and flashlight and noted the wet boards carefully. The rain had nearly washed away a long smear of blood. Anxiously, Norton went over the other boards and found more traces. On the side of the booth was a large handprint, blotting out half the letter of an advertising sign. Disregarding the plea of the Boy Scouts and Sea Scouts, which was printed on the side not to deface the booth, Norton ripped out the sign's glass. A fragment of it striking the float brought a query from the watchman's scow moored hard by.
What's going on down there?
Said the watchman. Norton approached him.
Did you hear anything this evening? A fight, I mean?
Well, yes, I reckon so. 2 or 3 to be exact.
Norton looked at the glass and the state of the blood on it.
I mean the one about 3 hours ago.
Oh, that one. Well, yes. Come to think about it, it was a smart fight, but it didn't last long. I was down looking at the light boxes on floaty, and I guess I must have been slow coming back because it was all over when I did get here, and then everybody was gone. Wasn't anything important, was it?
Did you see anybody around here?
There's lots of people around here coming and going. Now last night, for instance, there was 15 or 20 people around the dock when that kid got drowned.
Drowned?
Sure. Jimmy James. Tied an anchor on himself and jumped off. At least that's what the cops figured out. Took half an hour morning, bringing his body up. It's 10 feet of water here at low tide. Funny thing about James, though, tied the anchor line around himself so he couldn't move his arms an inch. Must have been drunk, I guess.
What about this fight you heard tonight?
Oh, there was a lot of cussing and scrambling around. No splashes, though. If you're looking for somebody in particular, I can get you a pike pole and let you poke around at the bottom.
And who owns that same boat over there?
Which one?
Norton swiftly led the way to its side and read the name, Emily Q.
I don't know. It's been here a month or two. Must be 100 boats around here, you know. Can't know them all.
Norton stepped over the intervening boats and to the deck of the big seiner. The cabin door was ajar, and he threw it open wide, looking down past the wheel into the combination galley and bunk room below. And there was no sign of George Fishcatcher or his friend. To be sure, Norton swung down into the big boat and looked into the forepeak. The place smelled of rotten fish and coal oil smoke. No one was aboard, though all the lights were burning. However, that fact indicated nothing, for in this damp climate, all boats used dock juice at a flat rate and kept their lights on to keep away the mildew. A bottle was on the table, smelling of fusel oil and other intoxicants. It and the other bottle by the bunk were empty. Norton came back to the dock.
You look upset, mister.
Said the watchman.
I'm peculiar. I don't like murder.
His tone chopped the watchman into silence. Norton went down the greasy floats and up the ramp. He had no way of knowing what had happened to Chick. It would be useless to consult the local police or the marshal, even dangerous. Certainly no one was angry with Chick. If this was vengeance, then it was directed against himself, Norton. Maybe Chick was involved. Maybe Chick had stepped out and tried to take George Fishcatcher and company into hand. If Chick was dead, then he was down at the bottom of Thomas Basin and had been for at least 3 hours. Too long to be saved, certainly. On the slender hope that he was carrying evidence which might take him to Chick, and determined to work on the assumption that Chick was alive, no matter how violently the facts pointed towards Chick being dead, Norton returned to the Sourdough Hotel and went up to his room. He felt guilty for putting Chick into that position, more because he had thought of it as a gag, letting Chick stand around in the wet. But he had supposed George Fishcatcher to be a harmless peddler, about as dangerous as a dead sockeye. The lawman side of Norton told him that he might be closer to solving the riddle during the Cane's disappearance than he had been for a month. And thinking of both Jerry and Chick, Norton began to seethe. He took Chick's celluloid hairbrush and dusted it to bring up the prints. Then he took Chick's water glass and got more prints. Finally, he held the gruesome fragment of glass up to the light and studied it. He had to make this preliminary test in case there were Chick's prints, in which case they would be worthless. Scar on the thumbprint of glass and Chick's thumbprints on the tumbler and brush checked exactly. Angrily, Norton threw the evidence down into the wastebasket, paced restlessly up and down the room. He could go to the police with this, but he was certain that anything they knew he could swiftly find out for himself. George Fishcatcher was drunk. That liquor bottle on the table and the one by the bunk where the young Q had been empty. The drunk like Fishcatcher, when he ran out of liquor, generally went out to get more liquor. Norton checked his revolver and slid it back into the pocket of his white trench coat. He went back into the rainy dark and strode toward Indiantown. He had no hope of finding his game, for if George Fishcatcher had indulged in murder that night, drunk as he was, he would have made himself inevident. 2 soldiers were rolling in the gutter outside the northern bar, and a hiccuping woman was cheering them on. One of the soldiers got up and began to kick the other in the ribs. Norton pushed through the crowd, thrusting aside a disinterested MP on the fringe of the crowd. The northern bar had been nearly emptied by the fight, but the crowd soon surged back in, 3 soldiers eager to buy the victor a drink, and the victor fondly supporting himself with an arm around the shoulders of a woman. Norton signaled for a drink when he could get the bartender's attention, and when it was poured, said,
Did you know a man named George Fishcatcher?
The bartender shrugged.
What's he look like?
He's a little runt with one eyelid sawed in half. He would be drunk.
Who's that one George Fishcatcher?
Said a bleary voice up the bar.
I do.
What do you say about George Fishcatcher?
I want to find him.
You said he was a runt.
And if I did,
He's my brother. You can't say that about my brother.
The man pushed the people away from the bar and reeled up until he could blow his fetid canned heat and fusel oil breath into Norton's face at close range.
You take that back about George Fishcatcher, you damn white man.
where can I find your brother?
Never mind where you can find my brother. You take that back.
The man swung. Norton backed up a pace, swung, and missed another time. So far, nobody had paid much attention. Norton was out of temper.
Listen, where can I find your brother?
You take that back, I
So
said.
the man picked up a bottle by the neck and swung with it. Norton shattered the weapon with his revolver muzzle. In the second sweep, he brought the barrel down on George Fishcatcher's brother's ear. Alaskan fighting had been taught Norton in just 6 months, and he had seen too much of it not to appreciate that the Marquis of Queensbury ceased to rule north of the 38. The man was still clawing at him, for he had not struck hard. Now Norton did strike across the bridge of the man's nose, which caved in and gave forth a fountain of gore. 3 of the man's friends instantly considered it their business, for they had not seen Norton's gun and thought it was a blackjack. One hauled at Norton from behind and got a heel in the groin. Another lunged from the right and caught the pistol barrel in his solar plexus and again in his jaw before he went down. The place was abruptly a screaming madhouse, where the fight had become numerous enough to affect everybody. Soldiers began slugging wildly at any target in sight. Bottles crashed on defenseless skulls. Men went down and got their faces kicked in. Teeth flew. Brass knuckles glittered. Norton went over to the bar and landed on top of the cowering bartender. Seeing somebody escape, half a dozen men tried to reach over and get at him. Norton pitched all the bottles in sight at them, meanwhile making his way down the inside of the bar. Discouraged, the men forgot about him. Norton made his way around the fringe of the crowd, crowning anybody who swung at him and swinging them back into the melee, where they got swung at anew for running into somebody. He was almost to the door when he saw George Fishcatcher. He was waving a glass at the fight and swinging at empty air, all the while seated in the furthest booth from the door. The man with him was sprawled out on the table, obviously sick. Norton reached out and got George Fishcatcher by the throat and yanked him out of the booth. George Fishcatcher tried to bite and kick and made a final contact with the glass on Norton's face. Norton gave him a knee in the groin, which relaxed him a trifle, and then got him around the throat in such a way that George Fishcatcher, if he kept struggling, would earn himself a broken neck in one direction and a strangling in the other. The hold was messy, for George was already bleeding from a laid-open scalp. Hammering his prisoner now and then in the kidney with his revolver barrel, Norton finally got him through the battle into the street. Norton was not much touched in the passage for all the thrown missiles, flailing chairs, and brass knuckles that hit George Fishcatcher before they could get to Norton, who was careful to keep the wall between himself and the war. He got his game outside in time to see Kelly and Chief Danton walk into the northern bar, swinging nightsticks indiscriminately. Most of the combatants were worn out by this time, and so it was not difficult to stop the battle. On the walk which departed from Stedman Street and ran darkly up beside Roaring Fish Creek, Norton found a rain spout, which was gushing icy water. The rain had not been enough to bring George Fishcatcher around. When it was either come to or drown, George Fishcatcher came to.
What boat are you on? What boat are you on?
Oh, I'm so sick.
Norton let his head out from under the gushing rain spout.
What boat, damn you?
I'm drowning.
Drowning be damned. What boat?
Roger Holloway.
Did you see anything of a big white man down on the Thomas Basin float earlier this evening?
No, please, no, I'm drowning.
Answer me.
But I have nothing to do. Come on. Yes. He fight. He's strong. I do nothing. I knock out. I see nothing.
Fishcatcher was probably telling the truth. At least there was no reason to try to get anything more out of him for a while. But the way he sprawled on a slimy walk, his moments of consciousness were over. Norton took a quick run through his pockets and found a few messed up papers. These he appropriated, and then dragged George Fishcatcher up the black walk to the first door. He opened this and tossed George inside, where George lay emptily on the cheap but gaudy rug.
What the hell's the idea?
Norton threw a $10 bill on top of George Fishcatcher.
Roll him over in the corner and throw a sack on him. If he comes around, slip him a Mickey. Okay, sister?
What?
Okay.
Norton closed the door and went back to the Stedman Street. Some people were clustered in his way, watching a fight between two women in front of the Sunset Liquor Store. He went across the street to the Federal Building side, and so on upward to the Sourdough. But the taxi driver in front hailed him.
You, Mr. Norton?
Yes?
I just took a message into the clerk for you.
Who gave it to you?
I didn't know him.
Norton went in and read the note.
If you want to keep healthy, go back to Juneau. If you don't, you'll be sorry. See? If you do, we'll ship your little pal to you reasonably intact. There is a boat, the Alaskan, sailing tonight for Juneau at 12:45 a.m. If you aren't on it, they'll find your pal the same way they found England.
In his room, Norton found another surprise. Although his door was locked, within all his clothes were packed, not carefully. Here and there a shirt cuff, tie, or pants leg protruded from a bag. Norton picked up the phone. To the clerk he said,
Would you please tell me if Miss Holloway is in the hotel?
Yeah, but it won't do you no good, partner.
What is her room number?
26.
Thanks.
Norton put down the phone and stood looking at his packed bags. It was all too evident from past performance that the person who had written that note had ways of carrying out his threat. It was also apparent that Chick was being held for that exact purpose. The decision was difficult. Should he stick to his track and follow through on slim clues he had, even if it meant the life of Chick Star? Or should he take the boat on the chance that it would save Chick's life? It was now 10 minutes to midnight, 55 minutes, unless he went to Juneau. Chick Star would probably be dumped into Tongass Narrows. Maybe Chick was already dead and the promise of return a lie. Had he been backed up by any forces of law, Norton would have had the town turned upside down, but forces of law which would actively help him were 4,500 miles away in Washington. He ran through his pockets and took out of them the papers he had gotten from George Fishcatcher. He already had a definite clue of the name of the boat, Roger Holloway, which would be one of the fleet which Elaine's grandfather had owned, and which Elaine now either fought to regain or really controlled. Odds and ends of bills, spread papers, and various scraps made up the contents of Fishcatcher's pockets. Spreading them on the bureau, Norton found a voucher on the First Territorial Bank made to the credit of George Fishcatcher and drawn on the account of the Holloway Halibut Company for services during this summer. It was signed in a messy hand which, deciphered, read Tarlov Gregornovna, Russian Tarlov. Russian Tarlov then paid the salary of George Fishcatcher, long-time defendant in a dope peddling charge. Russian Tarlov furthermore represented the Holloway interests, at least for the Roger Holloway on the fleet. Another piece of paper caught Norton's interest. It was a pink scrap which bore the printed name of Montgomery and Roebuck on the bottom and had smudged penciling in its middle. That piece of paper was identical with that found on James England, but this time it was possible to make out the writing.
Love me tonight for Joe and Eddie from Flora.
Norton scowled at the silly message and crammed it in his pocket. Then for some time he worked about his room. At 5 after midnight, he phoned down to the desk.
Have my bags put aboard the Alaska. I'll settle my account when I come by the desk.
You're the boss, partner.
Norton went out, leaving his door ajar. He went down the hall to 26 and knocked. There was no answer. A considerable draft of air seemed to be coming through the crack of the door, making a dismal moaning sound. Norton knocked again. A dull thump thump greeted his voice. Norton reached into his pocket and brought out a skeleton key and opened the door. The curtains at the window blew violently inwards, bringing a few gallons of water with the wind. The door slammed behind Norton. Elaine Holloway's eyes were frightened and pleading. The gag in her mouth was made of wood, pushed in and tied harshly. Her hands were held up by a rope which went over an antique chandelier above. A short coil of line was loosely wrapped about her feet, its ends dangling. She seemed to be signaling something with her eyes, darting them toward the window. Norton stepped to the blind curtains. There was a dripping fire escape just outside, and a dark figure was just now swinging off the counterbalanced steel ladder. The man below, a shadow against the rain-polished street, paused after he let the ladder swing back up. He saw Norton. Hugging hard into the building, the man raced up the corner and turned outside, disappearing so swiftly that Norton had no time to get at his gun. Turning to Elaine, Norton did not for a moment offer to do anything. He was suspicious of the corners of the room and the bathroom, and inspected them. Then he came up beside the girl. The table had been pulled out from the window and pushed within her reach. The hotel pen and ink were on it, and a new piece of blotting paper. Norton took the blotting paper over to the mirror and read its first stain.
Elaine Holloway.
Came back to the girl and untied the gag. He let go of the rope at the bed and allowed her to drop her arms. She said nothing, but sat where she was, trying to rub circulation back into her wrists.
Thank you.
Said Elaine Holloway after a little. Norton didn't answer her. He was poking into the wastebasket. And he pulled out another pink slip of paper with Montgomery and Roebuck printed upon it.
The Devil and the Deep Blue Sea for Roger and Gertie. What's this?
I never saw it before.
Then how did it get into your wastebasket?
I don't know.
Who was that who was just in here?
She shook her head.
I don't know.
Did you get a look at him?
Yes, but I have never seen him before.
What did he want you to sign?
I didn't sign anything.
She walked controlledly to the mirror and scraped her makeup
Look.
and rubbed the blotter on the shirt cuff. Some of the ink was still wet enough to stain the white cuff.
What's the idea of lying to me about everything in sight? If you come through with the truth, it will make it easier when they call you up before a federal judge to take a long rap.
She rolled upon him, her face paling, leaving two bright spots of color on her cheekbones to stand out like bloodstains.
You haven't anything on me.
This paper connects you with the death of James England.
Oh, to hell with that piece of paper, G-Man. You can't prove my visitor didn't throw it in there.
Tell me now that you don't still control the Holloway halibut feed.
I do not, and never have. My grandfather left it in charge of Stoddard, and when the income fell off, I came up here and Hecklin wouldn't turn the papers over to me.
Where is this Stoddard?
I don't know. I've never seen him.
Or heard from him?
He sent me his resignation and said he was going outside. That's all I know.
Ever hear of one Russian Tarlov Gregorovna?
She was holding her left arm above the wrist. Now she reeled slightly. When she tried to get her balance by gripping the bureau edge, Norton saw that the sleeve of her left arm had been burned. He glanced at the ashtray, saw that it was half full of old-fashioned wooden matches. He stepped to her side and took her hand. Plainly, the intruder had used burning matches against the forearm. Unreasonably, Norton was furious.
You're hurt. I'll get something.
No, leave me alone. I'm all right. I've been getting along without you splendidly, and I guess I can keep on.
He found some cold cream, and though she resisted, he put a coating of the grease over the deep burns. She had no thanks in her expression. Her full lips curled in disgust.
If you weren't such a stupid, conceited fool, this wouldn't have happened. I feel sorry about it now.
Well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're in a tough spot at that.
Well, certainly I am. But I don't want any sympathy from you at this late hour. All you can do is stew around and bully, and I've got lots more of that than I can stand. Now get out of here and leave me alone.
Listen, Miss Holloway, I may have been wrong, but it seems to me that that attack on you was staged to suck me into a street fight.
Well, if it was, then does that prove that I was in on it?
You sat within 10 feet of the two men who did it right in the Medlin Hotel restaurant. When you went out, they came over and seemed sore because of the way I talked to you. Explain that.
Well, I never could have seen them before if I didn't recognize them when I was sitting with you that morning.
Maybe. This slip of pink paper.
I don't know where it came from.
Norton looked at her. He began to feel desperately sorry for the girl. And at the same time, a little in awe of the way she was bearing up, despite the pain which must be in her arm. Maybe he was getting old, cantankerous. Maybe he was in the doldrums because of the weather. Maybe when a man had been in the FBI for 6 years, he got distrustful of everything.
I'm sorry I didn't give you a break.
Well, maybe things did look bad for me.
Norton smiled at her furtively. Down deep, he wanted to be friends with this girlfriend. He admired her now.
Let me go out and find you a doctor and we'll get some good care taken of that.
Oh no, you'll miss your boat.
That was a cold icicle in his chest.
And how did you know anything about my boat?
The man who was in here said you were leaving tonight, and that I wouldn't have any help from you even if I wanted it now.
And you are still anxious to see me get aboard?
Well, he said that if you didn't go, you'd be killed,
And she reddened.
I didn't want to see you killed, no matter how you had treated me.
Norton studied her. How neatly she tied these doubts into a string of apparent truth. Did she have such a swift mind that she could cover up blunders and yet be so stupid that she would continue to make blunders?
You doubt me, don't you? Well, I don't blame you much, I guess. A fellow like you always looks at the blackest side of the scales. Must be tough on a temper.
Leave my temper alone.
I come up here into a strange world. I run into a lot of strange occurrences and situations. Find people are anxious to get rid of me, and then to finish me off, discover that my fondest belief is not true. I thought law was always on the side of honest people, that the forces of right and order would rally instantly to the side of the abused, bringing swift justice. And Now I find that law is as much at the command of the evildoer as it is under the order of the honest people.
That is sort of tough on me, isn't it? If I hadn't made the error of supposing at first that there was something definitely wrong about you, or if you had come to me with a complete story, I might have saved you from this treatment tonight.
Now forget about that part of it. I got what I deserved.
When you feel better, you write me a letter outlining your whole case, and I'll do what I can. Make a formal complaint, and I'll see that it gets into the hands of the proper authority. That's all I can do.
Then you are leaving tonight.
And do my job.
I wish we had been better friends.
Norton smiled at her and went to the door. But before his hand touched the knob, there was a knock. He opened and saw the clerk standing there.
This is for you, ma'am. I felt the same.
For me? Well, I'm not expecting anything. There's a mistake.
I'll take it.
Said Norton, pulling the package away from the clerk and shutting the door in the fellow's face. She appeared nervous as she reached for the package.
Wait. If things are as you say they are, then there's a good chance that this thing kicks. Not that anybody up here is that big time, but we won't take chances.
She stood back and let him put the bowl into the washroom and the bathroom and run water over it. When it soaked for a while, he gingerly pried off the outer wrapper.
Well, I don't think it is anything explosive.
You seem nervous about something.
Oh, no. No, I'm not nervous. But after all, that package was sent to me.
You shouldn't take chances.
The outer wrapper fell away in the water and disclosed an odd box. It was made of inch-thick cork. Norton opened it with his penknife. Inside, there were 12 glass vials, tightly sealed, containing a white and sparkling powder. Norton broke the seal. He touched his finger in the water and then picked up some of the powder off it, smelling it. He fixed a Lane Holloway.
You ought to tell your agents to be more careful. $500 worth of heroin shouldn't be allowed to wander into the hands of FBI agents.
She looked wonderingly at the powder and then at Norton.
Heroin?
You are accomplished in many ways, fair lady, but you were never cut out to be a clever crook.
What are you going to do with me?
There's something I can do with you just now, and you can thank the fates for that, but you can't get out of Ketchikan for 3 days. And even if you did, I could have you picked up in Seattle. You better sit here and wait. Now tell me where you put Chick Star,
Who?
my young associate.
I don't even know him.
You don't know him, but you either murdered him or had him put away somewhere.
Oh, you'll never rest now until you've hung everything on me, including Lincoln's assassination, I suppose.
I won't risk Star's life, and there's nothing I can do. I'm going to Juneau tonight. If Star is sent back to me unharmed, then I'll make things easier. If he isn't, I won't rest until several have floated in his path down Tongass Narrows. That seems to be justice in this country, and that's the way I'll have to play the hand. I can't even take a chance on your having it. Because somebody did come in here and force you into signing something, I'll give you that doubt. And if Star comes back intact, we'll forget about that part of the charge. After that, it's every man for himself.
You're really going to Juneau then?
Yes.
In spite of the awful way things look? I suppose I owe you my thanks, and to be melodramatic about it, my life. You would have killed me afterwards if you hadn't scared him off.
You don't know who it was.
No.
Another lie to chalk up.
Put the heroin into his pocket.
We may meet again very soon, and when we do, the interview won't finish this way.
Oh, I hope not.
Norton was disdainfully admiring the way she could act. She had tears in her eyes now. He slammed the door and went down to the desk and paid his bill. The SS Alaskan's 15-minute whistle blew while Norton was paying his accounts at the desk to a sleepy clerk. Norton went down toward the dock. The steamer was white. It was decked wall at the end of the street. People were standing around in the rain, and others were leaning over the rails, bidding interminable goodbyes. Norton went into the steamship office and bought his ticket for Juneau. At the end of the room, two men, swathed in yellow oilskins, their faces in the shadow, were elaborately disinterested in what Norton was doing. When Norton got his ticket, he looked wryly at them.
Goodbye, boys.
The two looked at him, startled. Momentarily, he glimpsed their faces. Here were two halibut fishermen he had not seen before, but there were hundreds of their like in Ketchikan. They swiftly looked away. Norton went out and showed his tickets to the purser at the bottom of the gangway. The steward shuffled up to inquire after Norton's grips. Norton indicated them in the pile of waiting luggage, but would not let the steward carry them. The steward scowled blackly upon the practice of a passenger carrying his own bags and wondered, without coming to a decision, how he could discourage the idea from spreading. Norton climbed up a gangway to a smeary deck and entered a dark, dirty passageway upon which opened the first-class staterooms. He put his grips down in a cramped cubicle, typical of the Alaskan run of cabins. Two cabin mates were already there, trying to fight the top off a bottle so that their Godspeed bidding friends could have one last drink. Norton threw down his grips on an upper bunk and went out. Visitors were being shoved ashore, for it was now within 2 or 3 minutes of sailing. Norton went down a ladder and found a passageway which ran the length of the vessel, both below well decks. An engineer stared at it.
Passengers ain't supposed to come down here.
I'm looking for my dog.
Huh.
Said the engineer, and wandered off. Norton went forward, under the forecastle head. The ladder led up to the deck and the eyes of the ship. Norton thrust his head into the air and looked around. He had noted before boarding that there was a deep sag in the mooring line here, and the cargo lights and dock lights left this place in darkness. As yet, no deckhands were standing by to cast off. Norton wrapped his white coat into a bundle under his belt rather than have it give him away. Norton took a ship's towel, purloined in the cabin from his pocket, and threw it over the hawser. He dropped his weight on his hands, and swinging it to make it jump, slid downwards from the ship. As it was close to high tide, the water was close to his heels at the center of the line. The towel refused to bite on the upgrade, and any instant sailors would come to throw off this line. The halibut boat was moored with its stern a few feet forward of the Alaskan's bow. Norton started the hawser swinging sideways. Risking a twisted leg, he let go at the forward side of the swing and flew several feet through the air to land on the broad stern of the ship fishing craft. He straightened up, having checked his fall by grabbing a gurdy and cast about for a ladder up to the dock. It was hard to see through the thick rain and dark, and he groped his way forward, searching the pilings with his hand extended. He came up within 8 feet of the door without luck. Definitely without luck. The door was flung open from within, and the halibut fisherman in yellow oils stood there, stabbing a flashlight in his face. Norton threw up his left hand to fend off the blinding glare. He did not see the meaty hand reach for him. He was yanked forward, and in the same motion, pitched through the door of the deckhouse down the companionway to the deck of the cabin. The 6-foot fall stunned him for a moment, and from far off he heard a harsh voice say, "Eddie, nail him!"
Okay, Joe.
A ton weight dropped on Norton, pinning him down. A fist the size of a 20-pound load drove straight down at his face. Norton was conscious enough to roll his head. The halibut fisherman's fist hit the deck hard enough to crack the planking under the greasy linoleum. Norton used the interval of bawling rage to insert his heels in the fisherman's stomach and straighten them out. Eddie sailed back against the legs of the descending Joe. Norton sought to get up and draw, but his revolver was in his raincoat, which was still wadded up under his belt. A rack of cleaning knives was close by, when Joe's huge hand and one of them leaped forth. Joe booted Eddie from underfoot and dived for Norton. In his backward scramble, Norton hit the mascot coal stove with his hand, burning himself. But with the glitter of that knife, he was not interested in minor burns. A kettle of water was boiling in the stove rack. Norton, in one motion, scooped it by the handle and threw it violently at Joe. Scalding water sprayed about Joe's throat and down inside his oils. Paying no heed to his howling partner, Eddie began to empty the right knife rack, throwing them hard as he could in this confined space, the whole length of the cabin at Norton. Norton lifted his kapok cushion from the bunk and, making himself small, scrambled backward into the forward gear locker, where he had a small entrance to defend. He still had no time to get at his gun, for a maddened Joe was coming back into the fray, snatching down a .30-30. Evidently, the carbine was not loaded, for he swung it by the barrel as a club and battered at the protecting cushion, shouting a thunder of words only a halibut fisherman would know. He did not have enough room to properly swing the rifle and backed up, searching madly for a more murderous weapon. At the head of the forepeak bunk was a fire extinguisher of the pump type. Norton snatched it down as a battering weapon and smashed Joe's hand the moment it was laid on the entrance to the gear locker. Joe reeled back, thrusting the broken fingers under his arm and swearing incoherently. Norton reversed the extinguisher and released its handle. He pumped a forceful stream into Joe's unprotected eyes. The carbon tetrachloride blinded him. A lungful of it made Joe stop swearing. Eddie had not been able to see exactly what had happened, so narrow was the cabin at its forward end. Eddie found shells for the carbine and thrust its muzzle at Norton. A hard stream caught Eddie in the teeth and then the eyes. The carbine, pointing down, went off, driving a hole through the deck and the bottom of the boat. Eddie tore up the bunk with his clawing. Norton stepped out and smashed the blind, speechless Joe on the button with a fire extinguisher. Joe dropped into Eddie's path and was soundly kicked. Norton bent in the side of the extinguisher on Eddie from behind. Throwing the extinguisher and the rifle out the open port, Norton went up into the pilot house. He locked the companionway and then locked the cabin door. He went up the steel ladder to the dock. From here, he saw that the name of the boat was the Ezra Holloway. He was sore at himself for having been sucked into an obvious trap. Evidently, someone was in on this deal who could do some fast thinking and who missed very little. He stood in the shadows, getting his breath back and ordering his thoughts. Somebody who had been watching the Alaskan pull out noticed Norton.
Fight down there, huh?
Yeah,
Said Norton,
fight.
Halibut fisherman.
said the loafer, and wandered off, shaking his head. The fact that his leaving the Alaskan had been anticipated lay heavily in Norton's mind. The statement Joe had made, to wit, he said the son would try it, directed Norton's thoughts along a different path. That Elaine Holloway had been forced to sign a paper of some sort, if coupled with the dubiously truthful statement she had made about Hecklin's telling her that he now owned the fleet, rather pointed toward Hecklin. He would have to have the evidence of some sort to show if his ownership, provided that it existed or was claimed, of the Holloway fleet was ever questioned. Hence an attempt to wring a signature out of Elaine. There were a lot of loose ends to the idea, but Norton, in Chick's interests, thought it best to pursue a course to a swift solution, even if he had to leap to wild conclusions. Norton went up past the fish derricks, past Ketchikan cold storage, and again away from the docks into the town. He had a definite idea of where Hecklin lived, on a hill overlooking Ketchikan. It was an imposing residence, visible from the water and locally referred to as the house in the mist, due to the habit of the fog and rain coming just low enough at times to give the place a spectral appearance. The house was close to and about on the level of the top of the radio station's antenna mast. Norton went along the upper road, crossing Fish Creek above the city's restaurant district, and passed by the park. It was a constant upgrade. The houses thinned out. An arch at the foot of an upward vanishing flight of wooden steps was the entrance to Hecklin's home. Norton climbed up, pausing every landing to look ahead and behind, aware of a certain atmosphere of his place. After a considerable climb, he saw that the house above was glaringly lighted and heard excited voices emanating from it. Below, brakes yelped and 2 doors slammed. Several footbeats made the long stairway shake. Norton sped on ahead and dived off into the bushes. At a landing in time to let the chief of police, Danton, Kelly, and the doctor leap upward and by. Amazed, Norton swiftly but unobtrusively followed in their wake. The trio were quickly led into the home. Norton saw that the hill was too steep to get around the place, to get from the front to the rear, and so he took the only course left. He let the heavy knocker fall. A dazed servant boy let him in. A cook stood in the door of the far room, winding her apron around her hands. A woman, possibly Mrs. Hecklin, sat in the study, eyes hidden by her moist handkerchief. Norton walked through past the cook. Hecklin was lying on a blood-spattered bed, an evil old face the color of a dead salmon. his hands clutching at the spread. The doctor pulled open the dressing gown at the chest and ripped away the shirt. Hecklin was a rather gory mess. There was a round hole in the center of his chest which was pumping blood.
Is he in bad shape?
Said Chief Danton, helping himself to a box of cigars on the desk by the bed.
Don't know yet.
Said the doctor.
Small caliber bullet seems to have punctured the lung. Why the hell don't you get somebody to tell you how it happened and leave my end of it alone?
Well, if he's dead, then that's murder. And if he isn't dead, then that's just mayhem.
This is Hecklin.
Said the doctor. That fact seemed to come home to Chief Danton and Kelly. They went out and collared the boy who answered the door.
How did this happen?
Said Danton to the shaking boy.
I don't know. I hear a shot come to room. I come in and Mr. Hector lie on floor. Window was open. Is he dead?
How do we know you didn't do it?
I heard the shot too.
Said Mrs. Hecklin in the study.
Enrico wasn't even near. The door was locked from the inside, and Enrico had to break it open with an axe.
Where was the cook?
I was in the kitchen. You sneaking Irish.
Said the big cook with a defiant nod of her head.
You leave Enrico alone, or I take a cleaver to ya.
Now, Mrs. Hecklin, we hate to bother you with questions, but did you see anybody come in the house earlier this evening?
No one. Thomas was in his room going to bed.
Well, we'll have a look in there.
Kelly walked into the bedroom again and ran into Norton, who was helping the doctor get Hecklin straightened out.
Huh. Where'd you come from?
I just arrived.
Said Norton.
You run along, Norton. We'll attend to this.
Norton, having helped the doctor all he could, stood back, waiting for a further excuse to linger. Hecklin's safe was open, and papers were strewn about in front of it. Lying hard by the laboring doctor's feet was a patent leather pocketbook, black with a large brass buckle.
Small caliber bullet.
Announced the doctor, producing it. Norton took it out of his fingers, and though Kelly yanked it away almost as soon as he touched it, Norton could see that it was a .25 caliber.
If he dies, somebody will hang for this. Maybe.
Looks like self-defense to me.
Huh? Self-defense for who?
For the person who shot Hecklin. See that?
Partially hidden by a fold of the sheet was a Colt frontiersman. Danton scooped it up eagerly and inspected it.
Probably has Hecklin's initials on it.
I don't see anything on it.
He threw it down, having obliterated any fingerprints on it, particularly Norton's, who had scooped it out of a drawer and thrown it on the bed while the doctor was trying to separate cotton packs.
The killer evidently went out that window.
Suggested Norton. Kelly went over and leaned on the sill, and then bent far out, his dripping raincoat getting the entire sill wet.
You'll have to go outside to see where he went.
Kelly did not like to follow the suggestion, but it was too obviously the correct procedure, so far as he could see, to be ignored. Kelly lifted himself through the windows and dropped heavily on the side of the hill, starting a small avalanche. He poked a flashlight at the ground.
Hell.
Said Danton from the window.
You went and stamped out the footprints.
Norton swung the handle of the safe back and forth a few times and pulled open a few inner compartments.
Let that alone.
Growled Danton.
Say, we'll wipe out the fingerprints.
Sorry.
Said Norton, standing up.
Clumsy.
Reproved Danton.
I thought you guys were supposed to know about such things.
We'll have to get him to the hospital.
Said the doctor.
Send for an ambulance. He'll live, I think, but he may have to have a transfusion.
Danton called for an ambulance, and a little while later, the intern and his driver were struggling down the long, slippery steps, bearing Hecklin on a stretcher. Norton went into the kitchen.
Are you sure you didn't hear anything?
The cook shook her head.
Just a shot.
I suppose Hecklin had a lot of enemies.
No. Of course, that's pretty hard to say. He was a hard man, Mr. Hecklin.
Norton kept at it until he was sure the police weren't coming back. He went into the bedroom where Hecklin had been shot and swiftly hauled the pocketbook from where he had kicked it under the bureau. He put it inside his coat and went out.
I'm sure your husband will be all right, Mrs. Hecklin.
Oh, I hope so. He has been so worried lately that his health has been very poor.
Good night.
He went down the steps to the street and made his way across into the darkness of the other side. Under the cover of a bush, he inspected the pocketbook. As he had supposed, it contained letters to Elaine Holloway, a compact, initial EH, and an identification card. He was not quite sure why he had covered her up so thoroughly, staging a self-defense angle in case the police ever caught up to her, getting her prints wiped off the sill and safe if her prints had been on them. He had the solace of knowing that he had not interfered too much with the case. In an inside pocket, carefully wrapped in a linen handkerchief, he had the assault weapon she had taken from under the bathrobe of Thomas Hecklin. Hecklin had evidently sought to save himself by clutching the weapon. He had not avoided the shot, but he had at least retained, unbeknownst to himself, a full set of fingerprints of the attacker. Kelly had the slug from the gun. Norton had the gun and the fingerprints. Well, Kelly would have known what to have done with them anyway. Elaine Holloway came up the steps to the second floor of the Sourdough Hotel. Her face was tense with concern as she glanced up and down the dim corridor. Quickly, she inserted a key in her lock and opened the door. Her hand went out to the switch, and the light went on. She stumbled back with a gasp. Norton reached out and slammed the door shut behind her. He put out his hands to help her out of the rain cape, and she turned to let him remove it. He hung it on a chair where it could drift.
Late to be running around Ketchikan.
I had to find a drugstore and get something for my arm.
And you have it with you, I suppose.
No. Oh!
She had spotted her pocketbook lying on the bed and snatched it up.
Where did you find it? It had all my money in it, and I was so upset that I forgot to take it with me. I couldn't pay the clerk and said I'd come back for some money first.
What a find.
Said Norton, without admiration.
What do you mean? Where did you find my purse?
Where you left it.
Right here?
No.
She looked into the purse again and missed something.
What have you done with my automatic?
Well, it's in a safe place.
He touched his raincoat over his chest.
Why did you take it?
To save your pretty neck, my lady.
Oh, I still don't understand. Well, I've carried it since I was attacked that night. I wouldn't use it unless I had to.
Naturally, Hecklin forced you to use it.
Hecklin? Well, what does he have to do with this?
Listen, Miss Holloway. I'm interested in 3 things. The disappearance of Jerry McCain, special agent, the presence of heroin in Ketchikan and its import to the States from here, and the whereabouts and health of Chick Star. I am not interested, particularly, in the shooting of Hecklin tonight.
Hecklin? Shot?
Lady,
By whom?
Lady, must you always pretend? I have here the weapon. It is your gun. It was left on the scene in Hecklin's hand. Your purse was also there. You went to Hecklin to get back that paper he made you sign, and when he protested, you shot him and got it anyway. That was pretty cold-blooded, and even in Alaska, murder is sometimes punished. Hecklin is dying in the local hospital.
You mean you think I shot Hecklin?
You seem to be the only one carrying your own purse.
You got my purse and gun at Hecklin's house?
Where you left them.
But you're mad. It wasn't Hecklin who was here tonight.
Then who was it?
I don't know.
We won't quibble about this. As I said before, I am interested in 3 things. Jerry, Dope, and Chick Star. Right now it's Chick Star. Tonight I persuaded one George Fishcatcher to tell me that he was off the Roger Holloway. You know George Fishcatcher.
Do I?
He's a fisherman in your employ.
I employ no one. I tell you, I have nothing to do with my fleet. I know nothing about either Dope or your friend.
I saw you stop and talk to George Fishcatcher outside the federal building.
Oh, him! Well, he said he was a friend of my grandfather's and that if I needed to help him, let him know. I told him I needed no help.
What a plausible person you are. But we won't argue. Chick Star may be aboard one of your boats, perhaps the Roger Holloway, which I think is skippered by Russian Tarloff. If I went down there by myself, they would probably shoot me on sight. Now we'll make a deal. I will forget what you did to Hecklin if you will lead me to Chick Star and confess to the dope run. Hecklin dead means your execution. I'm the only one who knows you did it. dope rap will mean at most 20 years, 12 on good behavior, and you will still be a young woman when you come out.
Mr. Norton, you have gone too far. You threatened me with the chair and then with prison. For what? I have done nothing.
Quit the dramatics. If you will go down to Roger Holloway and get yourself aboard, thus distracting attention so that I can get the gentleman covered, I will forget about this murder.
No.
Then, I will have to go to Chief Denton and tell him where he can find the murderer of Thomas Hecklin and give him the proof.
Go ahead and tell him. Go ahead and make more trouble for me, who already has enough to last 8 lifetimes. If you had come to me and asked me to do this for you without all this threatening and bullying, I would have helped you all I could. But now, sir, you can go straight to hell.
Norton paused at the door. He could not but admire the majesty of her.
If I asked you nicely, right now, would you help?
What would I get out of it?
Oh, so you can drive bargains too.
Why not?
And what do you want out of it?
That any charge against the Halloway fleet for running heroin be dropped. You can arrest whoever you wish, but you cannot confiscate the boats.
Norton stared.
I must say that you can ask enough.
Only under those conditions will I aid you to get your friend back.
All charges against the boats dropped, and no confiscation then?
Yes.
But I can arrest whoever I please,
Yes?
including yourself.
If you can find any real evidence against me? Yes.
All right. I know when I'm vested. Put on your cape and we'll go to the Roger Holloway. You're very confident of having covered yourself up in this matter.
Why not be? I have nothing to fear.
Now, you don't know the meaning of the word, blonde fool.
She let it pass, put on her cape. Norton led the way out of the room, but insisted that she precede him down the steps and across the lobby into the street.
If you make any signals to anyone, much as I hate to do it, you get shot first.
And his hand tightened about the butt of his service 45 in his raincoat pocket.
Lead on.
She knew where she was going. She went up Water Street toward the city floats. The rain had increased in velocity and quantity, its gusts flooding out the lights along this deserted way for a second or two at a time. Ahead and to their left lay a number of fishing boats, trolling poles and decks shining under the swinging dock lights, vanishing and reappearing like some spectral fleet. Elaine Holloway went down the ramp, ducking her head against the torrents of water. With certainty, she picked her way up these slippery planks, which were rendered only slightly less treacherous by laying chicken wire. A nest of boats lay on both sides. A swinging light picked out the name of Roger Holloway on a tall bow. The halibut boat was third out from the float, necessitating their climbing over 2 boats to get to At the gunwale of the first, Norton stopped her by touching her arm and discovered she was shivering.
You go to the companionway and sing out for Russian Tarlov. You ask him to come on deck. If he won't, and ask that you come below, don't make him suspicious, but go below. Remember that there are ports open there, and I will be on the next boat at one of those ports. When you go below, if you must go below, I will be at that port. When I cover those in the cabin, you pick up any guns and throw them out the other port. If you try to shoot me, or in any way hinder me from taking these men, you get my first bullet.
Pleasant fellow.
If Russian Tarlov will come up, it will be easier, but I don't think he will. Be on your way.
She drew a deep breath and stepped over the gunwale, crossing the first boat. She stepped to the second and crossed its deck. Norton was beside her. He indicated the open port in the hull of the Roger Holloway, which he could command by standing on the deck of the second boat. Elaine boarded the Roger Holloway. She rapped sharply on the pilot's door. Quick movement sounded in the cabin below. Norton was ready to move up and slug Tarloff if he came out.
Who is there?
Elaine Holloway to see you.
There was a thump as the inner hatch went open, and the cabin door swung outward.
Who?
Elaine Holloway,
Oh, huh? What do you want?
come on deck for a moment.
It's too wet. Come below.
Elaine glanced at Norton, who had swiftly taken his port and his post beside the port. She stepped into the pilot house below. Norton saw her legs on the hatch ladder, and then Oliver as she swung down into the cabin. He cast a swift look at the 3 men in the room. Russian Tarlov still had his arm in a sling, but his comrade in that fatal battle was not bearing any signs of him now, outside of the plaster on his broken nose. The third man in the room was a sullen man whose face was nearly black with bilge oil. Russian Tarlov stood back so that Elaine could sit down on the transom by the table.
Well, I suppose you come to see about things. You got nerve to come down here. But I always say, blondes have nerve. What can we do for you tonight?
The bilge-faced men on the bunk and the fisherman on the other bunk looked quietly but fixedly at Elaine. There was a rifle above the bilge-faced man. Russian Tarlov was only half in Norton's view. Norton had to take his chances, for at last resort he could blast them as they had tried to come out of the ship. Norton put his face to the port.
Stand still, gentlemen. I can shoot before you can.
The three whipped about to face him. The bilge face shrank back from the muzzle of the 45 just inside the port. Tarlov's other friend froze to his blankets.
So, you turned squealer. This is a trap.
And while he spoke, he moved more quickly than Norton thought he could. Tarlov, battle-wise, placed himself in front of Elaine so that any bullet going through him might hit her. In the same movement and instant, he smashed down the lantern and by its last blow threw Elaine off the transom and in front of him, the while diving back out of coverage from the port.
You shivit.
Norton, he'll kill me!
Norton called himself a blundering fool. A gigantic doubt surged into his mind, and with it mad recriminations. He stabbed his pen flashlight into the room at risk to himself. The rifle by the bilge face was in instant use, the bullet throwing splinters into Norton's eyes. Blinded, Norton sought to fumble his way back to get away from this side of the boat. His foot contacted a rope which rolled. He sagged against a stay. The delay delayed and detained him too long to permit his reaching the float. He felt about and reached in the cover of the second boat's pilot house. Another shot glanced off brass by his head and went yowling away. He crouched lower, trying to clear his sight. He could see vague blurs of light. He got out a handkerchief and dabbed at his eyes. He had a sick feeling of helplessness. When he took the handkerchief away, though in considerable pain, he could see again. The splinters had gashed his eyelids, filling his sight with blood. The door of the Roger Holloway was flung open, and running low, Bilgeface got into the cover at the stern of the boat Norton was on. On the starboard side of the Roger Holloway, a hatch slammed open, and the ship heeled away from Norton. The plan was simple and deadly. The Bilgeface would come up on one side of the house, forcing Norton around, until he got his back to Tarlov on the far side of the Roger Holloway in the cover of the pilot house. Norton again wiped his eyes. He had missed his chance of getting the bilge face when he had dived from boat to boat, but now he thought he might be able to reverse the obvious and get aboard the boat next to the dock before the bilge face was set. Norton sprang across the gap. The carbine, flamed and slugged, yanked at Norton's collar. Norton dived to the dock on the far side and quickly went aft along the first boat, covered by the height of its hull. He could not escape up the ramp, but even if he wanted to, and he did not want to, for he knew definitely now that Elaine Holloway had nothing to do with the activities of Russian Tarlov. Her bargain with Norton had been honest. She had feared to lose her fleet because it had been used in dope traffic, halibut boats being able to come and go repeatedly in both Canadian and American ports without too much check, and able to contact vessels in the Gulf of Alaska out of sight of land, thus picking up contraband. The bilgeface had never seen her before, judging by his expression. At last and most, Elaine Holloway had not shot Hecklin. Russian Tarlov had mud on his boots. No fisherman had any place to go where he could get fresh sod. On these gravel streets and boardwalks out on the Muskeg, no such mud could be found. But there was mud in the terraced flower garden of the Hecklin home. Red mud, the same color as that which Kelly had on his boots when he came back in through the window. Norton understood the enormity of his own crime, sending Elaine Holloway into the hands of these devils, for she would never be led ashore now. And if anything happened that Norton could not release her shortly, she would be dead. Norton saw the silhouette of a bilge-faced man for an instant and fired. The man yowled and scrambled back. The second boat rocked violently, and then the first. Russian Tarloff was coming over to cut Norton off from the ramp, himself covered by the pilot houses. Swiftly, Norton leaped up on the stern of the first boat. He saw Russian Tarloff leap from one to the next and fired. But his sight and the rain made him miss. The third man got into action, firing at Norton from the deck of the Roger Holloway. Norton hunched down. That fool over there did not realize that he showed up against the dock lights. Norton aimed carefully and fired. The man straightened up and stiff-legged dropped backwards into the water. Norton worked his way toward the helicopter boat. He did not know where the bilge face was, or even if the man was badly wounded or not. He did not know where Russian Tarloff was. Crawling down on the decks of the two inner ships, he got to the gunwale of the Roger Holloway. Hammering came from inside the halibut boat. The inner companionway had been slammed, locked against Elaine's escape. The fishermen on the neighboring boats made more appearance, suspecting stray slugs. The rain increased its volume. Flame flared on the Roger Holloway. Another shot came from the dock where the Russian Tarloff now crouched. Norton screamed. A coil of hawser on his right had received the slugs. He thrust the coil through the rail and into the water where it splashed loudly. There was silence then, save for the downpour. Norton crawled as gently as he could from the gunwale aboard the Roger Holloway, aft past the fish hatch to the starboard side.
See anything?
Said Tarloff from somewhere.
Not a thing.
Called the big bilge-faced man. Norton slid into the open pilot house and across the deck beneath the wheel. There was no pounding now on the inner hatch. He drew the pin out of the hasp and silently opened it.
It's Norton.
A small gasp of relief came from the darkness of the cabin below.
Come up here.
She crawled up through the hatch, and he led her slowly back until she was in the engine room. Stray beams of rain-filtered dock light reached through the open door and fell on the cabin companionway. Norton replaced the hasp and pin without a sound. He crawled backwards until he was in the engine room hatch. Hidden, save for his head, Norton wiped the blood out of his eyes and then replaced the exploded shells in his revolver. For a long time, there was no sound from the dock. Then the Roger Holloway listed under a weight.
See anything?
Said the bilge-faced man nervously.
Nothing. Whatever. He must have sank.
He got Wrangle.
We'll squawk about this to the police.
I need a drink.
They came into the pilot house. The bilge-faced man stood with his carbine in the crook of his arm, his muzzle pointing unwittingly at Norton. That was too long a chance. Norton quietly raised his revolver. Russian Tarloff was opening the hatch.
Try anything funny down there, and I'll smash your brains out. Light the lights below, just to make sure she didn't dig up a gun.
Norton fired. The bullet took the bilge-faced man between the eyes and slammed him against the wheel, dead before he hit. Tarloff's reaction carried him out through the port door and down. Norton got a bad shot. Tarloff, seeing he could not make it, lunged back at the flame of the gun. He got the muzzle in his hand. Norton fired, and the shot took Tarloff in the shoulder. Tarloff wrestled the gun out of Norton's grasp. Lunging up into his quarry, Norton carried Tarloff backward. They fell together into the cabin and rolled through the darkness. Tarloff thrust an iron finger into Thornton's throat, making Norton writhe in agony. Somewhere there was a furious hammering, but Norton had no attention for that. Tarloff, kicking Norton in the stomach, got free. Norton was in the black cabin with a slightly wounded bear, unarmed and only half conscious. There was a rattle and then a crash as the bottom was broken off a bottle. Tarloff had himself a mangling weapon. There was fumbling as Tarloff groped for his victim. Abruptly, the forward compartment door caved in. Someone else was in the cabin. Norton heard a snarl as Tarloff gripped another, then violent fighting. Norton hitched himself up on the sink and found a box of matches. He struck one and located a light switch. The battery lights glared down into the room. Chick Star, dirty and ragged, still trailing the ends of the ropes which had bound him, was sitting on top of the Russian Tarloff, slugging him ceaselessly in the face. After a while, it became apparent even to Chick that Russian Tarloff had been out for some time. Chick got up and stepped on Russian Tarloff's stomach.
Why didn't you wait for me? I've been hours at it. But I could have busted loose and nailed these birds when you came into the cabin the first time.
I didn't know you were here.
said the battered Norton.
Gosh,
Said Chick, realizing it was over.
wasn't this a swell fight? I wish I'd been in on it. You know, they threw me in a skiff and rowed me down here. They'd never have taken me, but they asked for a match. And as soon as I had a hand in my pocket, they saw who it was and slugged me.
Elaine Holloway was kneeling beside Norton, wiping the blood out of his eyes.
I'm sorry about all that. I've been a fool.
So have I. But I was so scared the government would take my boats because of what had been done with them.
What's going on down there?
Kelly dropped down into the cabin. He was rendered speechless by the sight of the place and the dangling leg of the bilge-faced fisherman into which he bumped. Chief Denton came below.
Who's been shooting?
He saw Norton.
You again.
Me again.
Said Norton, finding enough energy to stand up.
What's it about?
Norton paid little heed. He took the prints of Tarloff, that is, and took out the .25 automatic. Even flour showed that Tarloff had shot Heckler. Norton reached over and wiped some of the stain off Tarloff's face. Then he called for water and sloshed it on Tarloff until he came groggily around.
Wake up, England.
What did you call him?
England. You see that corpse you pulled out of the Narrows was not England.
How do you know?
Because England, as a radio man, has his prints on file with the FCC. I took prints with a cigarette case of the corpse you found. In the letters I received this afternoon, they were stated not to be England's. They belonged to Jerry McCain.
Say,
Said Kelly, peering hard at Tarloff.
You do look something like England.
You're crazy. I can
He
prove.
vanished for a month and grew a black beard. You see, England, this print I just took answers to that description of England's which I today received. You killed McCain, got scared, pretended to kill yourself instead.
That proves nothing.
These pink slips of paper prove plenty. They are part of the Montgomery and Roebuck request program. By broadcasting certain requests, you regulated the activities of the fleet. You made Hecklin an unwilling partner, and when you thought he'd talk, you sought to kill him. You didn't. You tried to hang the dope running and that attempted murder on Miss Holloway. And this paper, which I took from the safe at Hecklin's, shows that you made Miss Holloway sign a letter you had written to Hecklin as though from her about her profits in the dope running. You planned very well, England.
I'm innocent. I Russian Tarlov.
Shall I give him another?
He doesn't need any more. Besides, Hecklin told me the whole story earlier this evening.
He did not.
He did. He said you were the head.
He had a lot to do with it too. He didn't know what was happening with these boats, but maybe he had the idea of stealing them and running Stoddard out. You can't hang this all on me, Hecklin. It's just as guilty.
And everything you say will be used against you, England.
Gosh, he talks like England, but he doesn't pull that phony accent. Say, Norton, you sure know your fingerprints.
Norton did not bother to say that he had yet to hear from Washington about the prints, that his case was a guess. He was tired of the Roger Holloway. Elaine and Chick helped him out of the hatch into the dock. The rain had let up quite a bit. Norton looked at Elaine.
That was awesome.
There was, you'll excuse me, Fresh.
That was so
That
fun.
was great, guys. And it's a long one, isn't it? By the end, we're all kind of going, holy crap, more words? Everybody was great. I was so
You're
proud of
impressive.
you guys. I can't tell you how proud I was of you guys. Just awesome. I wrote you guys just a delight. Absolute delight. I'm R.F. Daly, and I live in Los Angeles. I'm a writer, director, and actor. And I was asked to come and direct and narrate a production of the Chee Chalker by L. Ron Hubbard here in Ketchikan. And I didn't know what to expect. I've worked with casts all over the country, actually all over the world, and I couldn't be happier with the result. The cast were incredibly talented, incredibly nice. The crew here at KTKN were fantastic, and the whole experience has been wonderful for me.
I think this was great fun for all of us. You know, First City Players has this wonderful program they do every January called the Jazz and Cabaret Festival, where it brings in professional jazz musicians and we make music with them, and it's always fun. It really brings up the level of performances from everyone, and it's kind of been an experience like that. R.F. Daly and his professionalism was terrific. We had real fun working with a different kind of director in a new medium, and I feel like we all rose to the occasion and had a great time doing it. So a great bunch of people, and we, you know, to put all this together in a couple of days, it was a great experience.
My name is John Goodman. I'm the president of Galaxy Press. I've come here to Ketchikan to be able to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Golden Pen Award, initiated by L. Ron Hubbard when he was here in 1940. But also as part of this, we've worked together with the First City Players of Ketchikan and had an incredible experience. And part of this, we want to be able to contribute to the expansion of the arts in Ketchikan with a presentation of $1,000 to the First City Players. Thank you very much for your help.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is the Golden Pen Award that L. Ron Hubbard originally gave to Ketchikan, and we're now giving it to the Writers' Workshop. And thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much.